And welcome back. Next up, we have Dawn from Launch Darkly, who is not only an amazing speaker, but an incredible human. And you know what makes us human? Making mistakes. What makes us incredible humans? Learning from those mistakes. Take it away, Dawn.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Dawn Parsik, and I'm a developer advocate with Launch Darkly. I'm also a huge fan of failure. I'm here today to talk to you about how you too can be a failure. As I said, I'm a big fan of failing. I failed my driving test the first time I took it. I've been laid off from jobs. I haven't gotten every job I've ever interviewed for. And I often feel like I'm a failure as a parent. I didn't create a Pinterest worthy remote schooling setup for my son. I gave him a desk and a chair, and that was good enough for me. I'm okay with this. And I'm here today to tell you why you too should embrace failure at work. I have a question for you to start. What is something that you failed at? I encourage you to head over to the Permission to Fail Slack channel and share your failure with us. Don't be ashamed of admitting that you failed at something. And it doesn't have to be an epic failure. Small failures are okay too. The more we talk about our failures, the easier it is to normalize it and reduce some of that stigma that's associated when it comes to failing. Failure is common, and we have to be able to learn from our mistakes. I say this frequently, and I may have been a bit too successful in trying to convince my son and convey this concept to him that he has to learn from his mistakes. A few years ago, he came up to me and said, "Mom, I never want to come in first place. I never want to win." And I asked him why. And he's like, "Well, because then I won't be learning from my mistakes." I was able to reset that with him a little bit. So if failure is so good, why do we get that pit in the bottom of our stomach when we've made a mistake? Or even if we think we've made a mistake? The problem is that even though failure is good, there are consequences when something fails and when you make a mistake. When mistakes are made, there's financial consequences for the business potentially. It takes longer to resolve incidents, customers lose satisfaction, they leave, you lose a sale. Those aren't good for the business. But there's also that personal side of things. If we're constantly failing and not learning from those mistakes, we burn out. We lose our jobs, we lose confidence in ourselves, and this impacts our mental health. So, as I'm talking about this doesn't sound good. Maybe I'm not a fan of failing. Forget what I've said. We need to be way more cautious. Play it safe. Don't go out on a limb. No, that's not right. We want to do this. The rewards of taking a risk outweigh that safe and sure route. Applying for a new job? Sure, you may bomb the interview, you may not get it, but then again, you may get the job, you may get that promotion, you may get a raise. Apply to speak at a conference. You may be rejected, you may make mistakes, trip over your words, but you also may become an internet sensation and go on to become a world recognized public speaker. I like to think of failure and success as two banks of a river, and there's a bridge that takes you from failure to success. And that bridge is knowledge, learning, understanding. We need to be able to cross this bridge from failure and disappointment and that negative self talk to reach eventual success. When it comes to problems and incidents, I like the Netflix approach to incident management. They call incidents surprises. This eliminates some of that negative stigma associated. It's not an incident, it's not a mistake, it's not an error. We were surprised. What can you learn from that surprise? How can you take that knowledge and learn from it to reach success? One of the things that you need is a growth mindset. In the book, aptly named Growth by Carol Dweck, she presents two types of mindsets. One is a growth mindset, and the other is a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is that belief that you don't have an innate ability. It's hard work and perseverance that allows you to get better at things, the willingness to try new things. On the opposite side, you have that fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset is people either have it or they don't. And even if I work harder, I'm never going to get better. That abilities can't change. There is this great example of students that were given a test. They were broken into two groups. As the students progressed through the test, the problems got progressively harder. One group was told during that how smart they were because they were getting all of these answers right. And one group was told that they were working really hard and people could see that they were working so hard and doing their best because they were getting the answers right. Who do you think performed better? Those that told that they were like super smart? No, those that were told they were smart, as problems got harder, they gave up. Those that told that they were working hard spent more time and were able to do better on the test and proceed further. So it's not about what is internal, it's how hard you're willing to work and whether or not you're able to learn from those mistakes. To encourage growth also means that you have to encourage failure. It's one thing to tell people that it's okay to make mistakes. It's really a lot harder to create an environment where it's honestly okay to do so. Doug Rushkoff has this quote in his book, Team Human, that human teams should be based on common hopes, needs, strengths, and vulnerabilities. We don't get that by enforcing shame, but by embracing openness. It takes time to build this culture. And yes, you will make mistakes along the way as you try to create this. And there are multiple elements that go into creating this culture that encourages failure. First, you need to create a blameless culture. This blameless culture focuses on where a system or process failed. Instead of looking for a person to blame, there's an honest interest in examining how things can be improved. If you look for and attribute incidents to human error, you are assigning blame. We recently watched the movie Sully, and it is about a pilot that landed a plane in the Hudson River. And in the beginning, the NTSB was looking for who to blame. It wasn't a blameless culture. They needed to assign blame. Someone was responsible, and that person they were looking for was the pilot. They couldn't say that this was just, an accident or a fluke. Like there had to be somebody that they could point a finger and say, this was your fault. That's not what we want in a blameless culture. A blameless culture cannot be created without the notion of psychological safety. And not just the notion of psychological safety has to exist within that environment. This is the ability for people to show up to work without fear of consequences. It means you feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, safe to challenge the status quo without fear of being blamed, embarrassed, or marginalized. Employees need to feel empowered to speak up if things are moving too fast, if they're concerned about why a feature is being built, and to identify gaps in the processes. They need to feel they won't be blamed when something breaks. Building this type of environment requires empathy, it requires open communication, and it requires teamwork. The psychological safety is really the foundation of embracing failure. One way you can create an environment of psychological safety is to eliminate the word why from your vocabulary. Why is a word that we use very frequently. We have problem solving techniques centered around the five whys. The problem is, why is coded for explain yourself? And we learned this starting at a very young age. I frequently find myself asking my son, why did you do that? Now, that automatically puts you on the defensive. You're like, okay, like there's a right and a wrong answer to this. So I need to figure out what answer somebody else is looking for and give that answer instead. And that's not right. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to teach people to answer things in a certain way. We want to really understand what's happening. Answers to why questions end up becoming biased. They frame the answers to the follow on questions that we ask. Asking why implies like disbelief or that the statement is wrong. Instead, what you want to look at asking is what and how questions instead. This helps us get to what is really underlying. It eliminates some of the bias. It eliminates some of that negative stigma. I do have to caution you, though, that you need to phrase your how and what questions appropriately. Asking, what were you thinking? Or how could you make that mistake? Are not really appropriate how or what questions in terms of setting up psychological safety in a blameless culture. Part of this culture also includes asking questions and rewarding great questions. People, will often say, there's no such thing as a dumb question. And so they've taken it to this other level. And every time somebody asks a question, you hear, good question. So it starts to lose its meaning that, like, is every question really a good question? So think about how you can encourage questions, how you can encourage good questions without responding, good question, to everything. You need to be able to teach people that if you don't know something, it's okay to ask. Part of this failure is making time to learn, right? Because we learn from our mistakes, but you also need to make time to play because play shapes our brains. It fosters empathy, and it's at the core of innovation and creativity. Playing or games teach us to be a lot more comfortable with failure. Have you played games? Have you been on a sports team? Have you won every single game you've ever played? Have you been on undefeated sports teams every single time? My guess is no. So, games are a great way for us to learn and get comfortable with failure. It's really hard to be vulnerable and ask for help with a serious problem, but it's easy to invite somebody to play a game with you. I contribute this to the rise in game days and chaos engineering. The stakes are lower when we're trying to work in like a gamifying things. In a game context, you can make mistakes and easily back out of them, right? You're not impacting customers along those lines. And this notion of play includes taking time off. I'm very fortunate that I work for a company like Launch Darkly, where one of our values is that work is not life. Everybody needs time to relax and unwind. If you're working too much, avoidable mistakes, not the good kind of mistakes, will be made. Take a moment, take time for yourself, and play. So far, I've talked a lot about embracing failure in general, why it's important, things you can do. I want to shift gears a little bit and focus on how this applies to our lives as technologists. Where does this come in when we're supporting and shifting software? So first, I want to go over a few stats on performance and failure. The Accelerate State of DevOps reports has been surveying companies for years, and they've identified some trends differentiating elite companies from low performers. Not only do elite companies ship more frequently, do they deploy faster, they also fail less frequently. It's not that they don't fail, they do. They just fail less frequently. So we need to figure out how we can get to that point of failing less frequently. And that's that learning from our mistakes. These elite companies haven't gotten to where they are because they didn't make mistakes. What they've done is they've figured out how to provide more value faster without sacrificing quality and the health of their employees. According to the report, these elite companies have fostered a culture of psychological safety. Sound familiar? And they've also made smart investments in tooling. Elite performers choose useful and usable tools that improve productivity. Now, I'm not saying that you buy the right tool and all the problems magically go away. No, it takes more than that. You need the tools, and you also need the processes to help when there are failures. When we look at technology and think about mistakes, there are things like monitoring that can notify us when something's gone wrong, when we have those surprises and need to fix something in our systems. We run chaos days and experiments to figure out if something breaks in this way, what are the results? How can we run books in place so if this happens in production, we can quickly remedy it? We can use things like feature flags to enable load shedding. So if something is not performing, slowly drop traffic from services. Before you go out and start changing your processes or building tools, because I've posted them on here and told you, hey, you need to look at tools and processes. Take a look at your internal processes and think about ways that failure is popping in. What are the processes that are associated with failure within your organization? What are things that constantly seem to be breaking? And what can we do to try to remedy that? A couple of areas where you may encounter failures and mistakes is during build processes. When you're releasing software, it may come as a surprise to some of you, but releasing software sometimes results in failures, that things don't go quite the way you expected when you hit that deploy button. Using processes such as progressive delivery, they can help you release features in a controlled manner, as opposed to doing it in a big bang. So, progressive delivery will look at things like doing a canary launch or testing in production, putting features behind flags for targeted rollouts, making sure that you have internal employees test something and then a select group of beta users and then slowly roll out to more. Doing rollouts with progressive delivery makes sure that you can fine tune those features before releasing to everybody. So if something fails or when something fails, you've minimized that blast radius. You haven't impacted all of your users. So looking at progressive delivery, testing in production, those are ways in which you can learn. And as you learn, you're going to set yourself up for more and more success. Another area where you can learn is through experimentation. So what does it mean to experiment? According to the strict dictionary definition, an experiment is a scientific procedure that's undertaken to make a discovery, test a hypothesis, or demonstrate a known fact. In other words, experiments provide us with learning opportunities. Experiments are based on the scientific method, and science is about breaking things down into component parts, dissecting things to understand them a little bit better. We follow this process when we're troubleshooting a problem or when we're building a new feature. We form a hypothesis. We think, if we change the location of this button, more people will click on it. And so we go, when we change the location of the button, we can run experiments with our software to test out those hypotheses before going down that long path, collecting data, and then figuring out, did this work the way I expected it to? Here's a few ways that you might experiment on how changes will affect your users and systems. You can manage beta groups to collect feedback from users before rolling out to everybody and then incorporating that feedback. You can run A/B tests to collect quantitative data. You can benchmark performance to ensure that as you're releasing new features, you're still meeting your reliability and performance goals. But as with science experiments, we may get results we weren't expecting. These aren't necessarily failures. These are learning opportunities. You may have avoided a failure by experimenting. So I hope I haven't failed during this talk in teaching you to learn from your mistakes, embrace a growth mindset, take time out to play, understand that culture matters, and to experiment to gain some new knowledge. I'll leave you with one final quote. This one's from Seth Godin. If failure is not an option, then neither is success. I have a list of resources. If you go to this link, launchdarkly.com/Dawn, you can get these slides, the resources, and you can also get a t-shirt if you are so inclined. Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting with you in the Q&A and on Slack. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. We actually have a few things in common. Not only are we both developer advocates, but we both also failed our driver's licenses the first time. Although I'm sure that you didn't fail yours because you hit a pedestrian. But I did learn from that mistake. I haven't hit a single pedestrian since, and my mother is very proud. We'll be back right soon.